The notification didn't sound like an alarm. It was just a soft, polite chime cutting through the silence of a Tribeca penthouse. Yet it carried enough force to shatter a 10-year marriage. Julian looked down at the screen, expecting a client's email, but found a picture of his wife's car parked in a driveway that definitely didn't belong to her yoga studio. The caption was brief, clinical, and devastating. "She's not stretching. She's sleeping with my husband." In that suspended second, the expensive scotch in his hand didn't taste like success anymore. It tasted like ash. If the quiet unraveling of a perfect life intrigues you, and you want to see what happens when the betrayed decide to stop being victims, stay with me. There are truths here that only come out when the lights go down. The rain in Tribeca didn't wash things clean. It just made the grit slicker, turning the cobblestones into dark, polished mirrors reflecting the city's exhaustion. Julian Thorne stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of his 42nd floor apartment, watching the blur of red taillights on West Street. The apartment was a masterpiece of minimalist architecture, Julian's own design. But tonight, the vast emptiness of the white oak floors felt less like an aesthetic choice and more like an indictment. He checked his watch. 8:15 p.m. Elena was late. Again. "Client dinner in Soho," she had texted at 6:00 p.m. "Don't wait up. Love you." The "love you" essal had felt automatic, a digital signature appended to a business transaction. Julian swirled the amber liquid in his glass, a 20-year-old single malt that cost more than his father's first car. He took a sip, letting the burn distract him from the gnawing intuition that had been settling in his gut for weeks. It was the little things. The phone placed face down on the marble island, the changed passcode, the shower taken immediately upon returning home. His phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, vibrating against the stone with a harsh, insect-like hum. Julian turned, expecting another update from Elena. Perhaps a delay. Perhaps a cancellation. It wasn't Elena. It was a LinkedIn message. A professional platform, the last place one expects personal devastation. The sender was a woman named Clara Vance. No mutual connections. Her profile picture showed a woman with severe, intelligent eyes and hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, a professor of comparative literature at Columbia. He opened the message, his thumb hovering over the screen. "Mr. Thorne," the message read, "I believe we have a mutual interest, specifically where our spouses are right now." Julian frowned, his heartbeat kicking up a notch, a cold thud against his ribs. He typed back, his fingers stiff. "Excuse me? I think you have the wrong person." A typing bubble appeared instantly. Then, an image loaded. It was a photo taken from a distance, grainy but unmistakable. It showed the entrance of a boutique hotel on the Upper East Side, the Carlyle. Two people were walking through the revolving doors, the man's hand resting possessively on the small of the woman's back. The woman was wearing the distinct emerald trench coat Julian had bought Elena for her birthday last month. The man was not Julian. The text below the image followed. "That is my husband, Mark. That is your wife, Elena. This photo was taken 10 minutes ago. They are not at a client dinner." Julian stared at the phone. The silence in the apartment seemed to suck the air out of the room. He didn't drop the glass. He didn't scream. He simply froze. His architect's brain trying to restructure reality, trying to find an angle where this structure didn't collapse. There wasn't one. The geometry of betrayal was absolute. Another message appeared. "I am sitting at the bar in the hotel lobby. I don't want to make a scene, I just don't want to be alone with this knowledge. If you want the truth, come here." Julian set his glass down on the counter. The condensation left a ring on the pristine surface. He looked at the ring, realizing that he would never worry about a coaster again. The order of his life had just been demolished. He grabbed his coat. The ride uptown was a blur of wet asphalt and neon lights. Julian sat in the back of the Uber, feeling a strange detachment, as if he were watching a film about a man whose life was falling apart. He felt nauseous, yet oddly, clinically detached. When he walked into the lobby of the Carlyle, the air smelled of old money and expensive perfume. It was a smell that usually comforted him. Tonight, it smelled like rot. He spotted her immediately. Clara Vance sat in a corner booth, nursing a glass of white wine. She looked different than her profile picture. Softer, more frayed. Her hair was loose and her eyes were red-rimmed, though her posture was rigid, holding herself together by sheer force of will. Julian approached the table. She looked up, and for a moment, two strangers shared the most intimate look possible, the shared recognition of being the fool. "Julian," she said. Her voice was low, steady, but brittle. "Clara," he replied, sitting opposite her without taking off his coat. "Tell me this is a mistake." She slid her phone across the table. It was unlocked. "Scroll," she said. "Texts, emails, hotel bookings. Mark isn't as careful as he thinks he is. Or maybe he just stopped caring if I found out." Julian picked up the device. He didn't want to look, but he had to. He read the first few lines of a text thread named E. The intimacy of the language, words Elena used to say to him, jokes he thought were theirs, hit him harder than the sexual, explicit content. It was the emotional theft that drew blood. He put the phone down, feeling bile rise in his throat. "How long?" "6 months," Clara whispered, taking a sip of wine. Her hand trembled slightly. "They met at a gallery opening. Mark buys art. Elena sells it. A classic cliché." "Why did you call me?" Julian asked, his voice sounding hollow to his own ears. "Why not just confront them?" Clara looked him in the eye. A strange fire flickered behind her grief. "Because if I go up there and scream, they win. They get to look at me with pity. They get to say our marriage was dead anyway. I don't want to be the victim, Julian." She leaned forward. The lighting of the bar cast shadows across her face, making her look dangerous. "I have a different idea," she said. "A way to take the power back. But I can't do it alone." Julian looked at the ceiling, imagining Elena a few floors above him, perhaps laughing, perhaps whispering promises she had already broken. The pain was sharp, jagged. "What do you want?" Julian asked. Clara's lips curved into a faint, humorless smile. "I don't want to sleep with you, Julian. I want to date you. Publicly. Visibly. I want them to wonder. I want them to feel the ground shake." She paused, letting the words settle. "They claimed they were working? Fine. Let's show them what we're doing while they're working." Julian looked at her. It was insane. It was petty. It was beneath him. "When?" he asked. "Tonight," Clara said. "Right now." "I'm not suggesting an affair, Julian. I'm suggesting a mirror." Clara's voice was steady, cutting through the low hum of conversation in the hotel bar. She didn't touch her wine. Her hands were clasped on the table, knuckles white, betraying the calm facade she was trying to maintain. Julian stared at her. The proposition hung in the air between them, heavy and absurd. You want us to date, to pretend. I want them to feel what we feel, Clara corrected, her eyes dark and unblinking. Right now, they are the protagonists of a romantic tragedy. They think they are special. They think their love is a noble secret. As long as we are the ignorant spouses at home, we are just furniture in their story. We are obstacles. I want to become the plot twist. Julian looked away, his gaze drifting to the revolving doors of the lobby. Somewhere upstairs, his wife was likely buttoning her coat, checking her reflection, preparing the face she would wear when she walked back into their home. The thought made his stomach turn. I'm a lawyer, Clara. I deal in facts, in evidence, Julian said, though the defense felt weak even to him. This feels childish. Is it adult to sit at home and wait for them to leave us? Clara countered sharply. Because that is the trajectory. Mark has started talking about finding himself. He's rewriting our history to justify his exit. Elena will do the same, unless we disrupt the narrative. She slid a business card across the polished mahogany table. It was heavy stock, academic and simple. Think about it, she said. We go to places where they will hear about it. Galleries, faculty mixers, restaurants they love. We don't touch. We don't kiss. We just exist together, looking happy. We let their paranoia do the rest. Julian didn't take the card immediately. He stood up, the weight of the evening pressing down on his shoulders like a physical load. I need to go. Clara didn't try to stop him. She just watched him go, a solitary figure moving through the gilded lobby. The apartment was exactly as he had left it, cold, pristine, and silent. Julian poured the scotch he hadn't finished earlier down the sink. He needed a clear head. He sat on the Italian leather sofa in the dark, listening to the city breathe outside. At 10:45 p.m., the lock clicked. Julian didn't move. He watched the foyer as Elena walked in. She was glowing. That was the worst part. She didn't look guilty. She looked revitalized. Her cheeks were flushed, her hair slightly mussed in a way that could be attributed to the wind or to hands tangling in it. She spotted him in the living room and offered a bright, easy smile. Hey, she said, shedding the emerald coat, the coat from the photo. You're sitting in the dark. Everything okay? Just thinking, Julian said. His voice sounded calm, terrifyingly so. How was the dinner? Elena walked into the kitchen to pour herself a glass of water. Oh, exhausting. The client is from Tokyo, very traditional. We talked about minimalist structures for 3 hours. I barely ate. The lie was seamless. It was delivered with the casual grace of a woman who had practiced it in the elevator ride up. She walked over to him, leaning down to kiss his forehead. She smelled of rain, expensive white wine, and a faint, woody cologne that was not his. I missed you, she whispered against his skin. Something inside Julian snapped. It wasn't a loud break. It was a quiet, structural failure. He looked at the woman he had been married to for 10 years, the woman whose career he had supported, whose quirks he had adored. He realized he didn't know her at all. He was looking at a stranger who was using his trust as a shield. If he confronted her now, she would deny it. Then she would cry. Then she would blame him for being distant. She would turn the tables until he was the one apologizing for being suspicious. Clara was right. The direct approach was a trap. Elena straightened up, yawning. I'm going to shower. Coming? In a minute, Julian said. He waited until he heard the bathroom door close and the water start to run. The sound of the shower, usually a domestic comfort, now sounded like another layer of washing away the evidence. Julian reached into his pocket. He hadn't realized he had taken the card until his fingers brushed the sharp edge of the cardstock. He pulled it out. Clara Vance, Ph.D. He pulled out his phone. His thumb hovered over the screen, the blue light illuminating his face in the darkness. He typed a single message. Dinner. Friday. The Spotted Pig. It was a place Elena had been begging him to take her to for months. A place where the art crowd swarmed like bees. It was public. It was loud. It was a declaration of war. He hit send. From the bathroom, he heard Elena humming a tune. It was a happy song. Julian set the phone down, his face hardening into a mask of stone. Let her be happy for one more night. The Spotted Pig was less a restaurant and more a contact sport for the West Village elite. It was loud, cramped, and smelled of roasting pork and expensive perfume. Exactly the kind of chaotic energy Elena thrived on, and exactly the kind of place Julian usually avoided. Tonight, however, he was center stage. Julian sat at a corner table that Clara had miraculously secured. He adjusted his cufflinks for the third time. He felt ridiculous, like an actor who hadn't memorized his lines. Every time the door opened, his neck pricked with the irrational fear that Elena would walk in, despite her telling him this morning that she had a gallery emergency in Chelsea. Then Clara arrived. She looked nothing like the frayed academic woman from the hotel bar. She was wearing a silk slip dress, the color of midnight, cut bias to cling to her frame in a way that was elegant, but undeniably suggestive. Her hair, previously pulled back in a severe bun, now cascaded in loose waves around her shoulders. She looked dangerous. She looked like a woman who was not being cheated on. Julian stood up, his manners automatic. You look like I'm not spending my Friday night grading papers while my husband sleeps with your wife? Clara finished, sliding into the booth. Her voice was light, but her eyes remained vigilant, scanning the room. Sit down, Julian. People are watching. Specifically the woman at the bar in the red blazer. She's an associate at Mark's firm. Julian sat, feeling the heat of the room rise. So, what is the script? The script is we are fascinated by each other, Clara said, picking up the menu. She leaned in closer than necessary, her shoulder brushing his. The contact sent a jolt of static through him. Smile, Julian. You're supposed to be charmed, not undergoing a deposition. Julian forced a smile. It felt tight on his face. This is harder than I thought. I feel like everyone knows. They know nothing, Clara whispered, her eyes locking onto his. They see a successful architect and a woman who is listening to him very intently. To them, we are the start of something. To Mark and Elena, we are about to become a nightmare. The waiter arrived, and they ordered wine, a bottle, not glasses. As the night wore on, the alcohol helped blur the sharp edges of Julian's anxiety. They played the game. When Clara told a story about a student's absurd thesis, Julian laughed, a genuine, deep laugh that surprised him. When Julian described the structural flaw in a rival's building, Clara listened with a rapt attention that Elena hadn't shown in years. Touch my arm, Clara murmured suddenly, mid-sentence. What? The associate at the bar is looking. Touch my forearm, lightly, like you're emphasizing a point. Julian hesitated, then reached out. His fingers brushed the cool skin of her forearm. It was a calculated move, a tactical strike. Yet the texture of her skin, the pulse he felt beneath his fingertips, felt alarmingly real. He didn't pull away immediately. "You have cold hands," she said, not breaking character, but her voice dropped an octave. "Circulation issue," he murmured, "or maybe just cold feet." Clara looked at him then, and for a second, the performance wavered. The noise of the restaurant faded into a dull roar. "Why do you think she did it?" Clara asked, the question stripping away the artifice. "Elena. Why him?" Julian withdrew his hand, wrapping it around his wineglass. "I was boring, I suppose. Stability is attractive until it becomes invisible. I built her a life, Clara. I constructed the walls, the floor, the ceiling. I thought that was love, providing a space." He looked down. She wanted someone to burn the house down. Clara remained silent for a long moment. "Mark didn't want fire," she said softly. "He wanted a mirror. He wanted someone who looked at him and saw a god, not a husband who forgets to take out the recycling. I was too real for him. Elena, she's a fantasy." They stared at each other, two casualties of the same war, analyzing the shrapnel. In that moment, they weren't pretending to be a couple. They were two lonely people recognizing the shape of each other's scars. "We shouldn't talk about them," Julian said, his voice rough. "Not tonight. Tonight is about us." "Is there an us?" Clara asked, tilting her head. "There is, if we want them to believe it," Julian replied. He raised his glass. "To the plot twist." Clara smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. It was a sad smile, but it was genuine. She clinked her glass against his. "To the plot twist." As they drank, a flash went off near the entrance. It wasn't directed at them, but it was close enough. The digital ecosystem of New York City was awake, and somewhere, a shutter had clicked. The seed was planted. Julian didn't look back at the door. He looked at Clara, and for the first time in months, he didn't feel the crushing weight of being alone. He felt the thrill of the fall. The drive to Montauk was defined by the kind of silence that usually takes years to earn. Julian drove his vintage Porsche with a practiced ease, the gray ribbon of Highway 27 stretching out before them under a slate-gray sky. Beside him, Clara watched the landscape shift from suburban sprawl to the windswept dunes of the East End. They had decided on a weekend escalation. A quiet getaway posted to social media was the universal signal of a relationship moving to the next tier. It was the move Mark and Elena had never dared to make publicly, restricted to stolen hours in city hotels. "This house?" Clara asked, breaking the silence as the ocean came into view. "Is it yours?" "It's a client's. They're in Europe," Julian lied smoothly, then sighed. "Actually, that's not true. I designed it for us, for Elena and me. I bought the land 3 years ago. I never told her." Clara turned to look at him. "Why?" "Because she hates the silence," Julian said, turning onto a gravel driveway. "She needs noise. She needs to be seen. If I brought her here, she would have spent the weekend complaining about the lack of cell service or inviting people over. I wanted, I don't know, a sanctuary." The house was a structure of concrete and glass, perched precariously on the edge of a dune, staring down the Atlantic. It was beautiful, cold, and utterly lonely. They spent the afternoon staging the scene. It was a macabre form of set dressing, a cashmere throw casually tossed on the sofa, 2 wine glasses placed by the fire pit, a book left open on the patio table. They were curating a life they didn't live. As evening fell, the temperature dropped, and the wind whipped off the ocean, rattling the floor-to-ceiling windows. Julian lit a fire in the suspended hearth. The orange glow reflected against the glass walls, turning the room into a warm cage surrounded by infinite darkness. Clara sat on the rug, hugging her knees. She had changed into an oversized sweater, looking smaller, less armored than she did in the city. "Mark always said I was too clinical," she said softly, staring at the flames. "He said I analyzed our marriage like it was a text to be deconstructed. He wanted passion, and I gave him footnotes." Julian poured 2 glasses of red wine and sat down, not on the sofa, but on the floor near her. "And Elena told me I was a statue. Perfect, durable, and cold. She said she felt like she was living in a museum, not a home." He handed her a glass. Their fingers brushed, lingering a second longer than necessary. "Do you think they're right?" Clara asked. She turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "Are we the reason they left? Did we push them to each other?" It was the question Julian had been avoiding since the first text message. The mirror effect. Looking at Clara, he saw the male version of himself, someone who valued loyalty and intellect over chaotic displays of emotion. And in him, she likely saw the stability she had tried to give Mark. "They made a choice, Clara," Julian said firmly, though his voice lacked the anger it had a week ago. "But maybe we were lonely long before they cheated. I think I've been lonely for 5 years." "Me too," she whispered. The air in the room shifted. It wasn't the charged, performative tension of the restaurant. It was something heavier, slower, gravity. "We need the photo," Clara said, her voice barely audible, as if she didn't want to break the spell. "For the narrative." "Right, the narrative." Julian took out his phone. The plan was simple. A picture of their legs stretched out by the fire, socks touching, the wine glasses in the foreground. Intimate, domestic, undeniable. He leaned back, extending his legs next to hers. She shifted closer. Her shoulder pressed against his. The heat from her body was shocking against the cool air of the room. He framed the shot. Click. He looked at the screen. It looked real. It looked like a Sunday evening in a marriage that worked. He didn't post it immediately. He set the phone down, face up. "Julian," Clara said. She wasn't looking at the fire anymore. She was looking at his mouth. "We agreed," Julian said, his voice straining. "No crossing lines. We are better than them." "Are we?" Clara challenged. "We're sitting in a glass house, plotting revenge, drinking wine. And for the first time in months, I don't want to be anywhere else. Is that acting?" Julian looked at her. The intelligence in her eyes, the vulnerability she tried to hide, the curve of her neck in the firelight. He realized with a jolt of panic that the revenge was becoming secondary. He wasn't here to hurt Elena anymore. He was here because he wanted to be with Clara. "No," Julian admitted, his voice rough. "It's not acting." He reached out, his hand cupping her cheek. Her skin was warm. She leaned into his touch, closing her eyes, a sigh escaping her lips that sounded like a surrender. Outside, the ocean roared, but inside, the silence was finally broken. Not by noise, but by the terrifying sound of 2 people falling. Monday morning in the penthouse usually unfolded with the precision of a Swiss watch. Coffee at 6:30, CNBC in the background. A brief coordination of schedules, and separate elevators by 7:15. Today, the rhythm was broken. When Julian walked into the kitchen, buttoning his cuffs, Elena was already there. She wasn't dressed for the gallery. She was wearing her silk robe, leaning against the marble island, holding a mug of tea with both hands. Her phone lay face up on the counter, the screen dark but menacingly present. She looked tired. Not the fatigue of a late work dinner, but the hollow-eyed exhaustion of someone who hadn't slept because their mind wouldn't shut off. "You were gone all weekend," Elena said. It wasn't a question. Julian didn't pause. He walked to the espresso machine, his back to her. "I told you, I needed to inspect a site, the Montauk project." "I didn't know we had a Montauk project," she countered, her voice tight. "And I certainly didn't know it required wine by the fire." Julian turned slowly, leaning against the counter. He took a sip of his espresso, savoring the bitterness. For the first time in months, he looked at his wife and didn't feel the crushing weight of inadequacy. He felt a cold, distant pity. "It's a new acquisition," Julian lied, his voice level. "Client confidentiality. You know how it is." "Who took the picture, Julian?" The question hung in the air, sharp and desperate. This was the woman who had spent months lying to his face, now demanding truth with the indignation of the righteous. "Does it matter?" Julian asked softly. "You were busy with the Japanese client. I didn't want to disturb you." Elena flinched. The reference to her alibi hit its mark. She opened her mouth to argue, to demand, to scream, but she closed it again. She had no ground to stand on. To accuse him of infidelity would require a conversation about fidelity, a door she was terrified to open. I feel like you're drifting away," she whispered, changing tactics to victimization. "We used to talk." "We used to do a lot of things," Julian said, checking his watch. "I have to go. Don't wait up." He walked out of the apartment without kissing her goodbye. The silence he left behind was louder than any argument. By noon, the paranoia had spread to the other side of the equation. Julian met Clara for lunch in a nondescript deli near Bryant Park, neutral ground, far from the eyes of the Upper East Side. Clara looked electric, vibrating with a nervous energy. "Mark is losing his mind," she said, unpacking a salad she was too anxious to eat. "He saw the post. He's been texting me all morning, asking where I was, who I was with. He even checked the credit card statements, but I used cash." "Good," Julian said, though the satisfaction tasted like ash. "That was the point, wasn't it?" "He told me he loves me this morning," Clara said, her voice dropping. "He hasn't said that in 2 years. He brought me flowers. He's terrified, Julian. He senses he's losing his grip on me, and suddenly, I'm valuable again." She looked up at him, her eyes searching his. "It's working. We're winning." "Are we?" Julian asked. He looked at Clara, the way the sunlight caught the stray hairs escaping her bun, the intelligence in her gaze, the memory of her warmth next to him in the Montauk house. He realized with a sinking feeling that he didn't care about Mark's flowers or Elena's jealousy. When Elena had looked at him this morning, he hadn't felt triumphant. He had just felt bored. He didn't want to fix his marriage. He didn't even want to punish Elena anymore. He just wanted to be back in the car with Clara, driving to nowhere. "I don't care about them anymore, Clara," Julian admitted, his voice low. Clara stopped moving. The plastic fork hovered over her salad. "What do you mean?" "I mean I watched my wife crumble this morning, and I didn't feel anything. But when I thought about not seeing you today, that panicked me." Clara put the fork down. The noise of the deli, the clatter of plates, the shouting of orders faded away. "Julian," she warned, but her voice lacked conviction. "We have a plan. The goal was to wake them up." "Maybe the goal changed," he said. "Maybe we woke up instead." Her phone buzzed on the table. It was Mark. Again. His phone buzzed a second later. "Elena, can we have dinner tonight? Just us. Please." Julian looked at the message, then at Clara. The game had worked too well. Their spouses were fighting for the manso now, trying to reclaim the territory they had neglected. "What do we do?" Clara asked, reading the fear in his eyes, because it mirrored her own. "We escalate," Julian said, making a decision that felt reckless and inevitable. "The annual Met Gala is in 2 weeks. Elena is going. Mark is a donor, so he'll be there. And I'm not going as Elena's +1, Julian said. I'm going to invite you." Clara's eyes widened. "That's nuclear, Julian. That's not a hint. That's a declaration." "Good," Julian said, reaching across the table to cover her hand with his. This time, it wasn't for a show. It was for an anchor. "I'm tired of whispering." The studio was Julian's true home. Unlike the penthouse, which was a showroom for Elena's social ambitions, this loft in Dumbo was a place of dust, drafting paper, and silence. It smelled of graphite and cedar. It was the only place where he felt the geometry of the world made sense. Until tonight. It was 11 p.m. Outside, a storm was battering the Brooklyn waterfront, the rain lashing against the industrial windows like handfuls of gravel. Inside, the only light came from the desk lamp and the glow of the city across the river. Julian wasn't working. He was staring at a blueprint he hadn't touched in an hour. His phone sat on the desk, vibrating intermittently. Elena was texting him. She had cooked dinner. She wanted to talk. She wanted to reconnect. The sudden desperation of her affection was suffocating. The buzzer rang. He didn't need to ask who it was. He buzzed her up. Clara entered, shaking the rain from her coat. She looked pale, her eyes wide and haunted. She didn't say hello. She walked straight to the leather sofa in the corner of the room and sat down, burying her face in her hands. "I can't go home," she said, her voice muffled. "Mark planned a surprise trip, Paris, for our anniversary. He bought tickets. He was on his knees, Julian, crying, asking me why I've been so distant." Julian walked over to her, his footsteps echoing on the concrete floor. He poured a glass of whiskey from the bottle he kept in the filing cabinet and handed it to her. "He's terrified," Julian said. "You're winning." "It doesn't feel like winning," Clara snapped, looking up. Her eyes were wet. "It feels like I'm kicking a wounded dog. He's trying so hard and I look at him and I feel nothing. No anger, no love, just nothing. It's like looking at a stranger who lives in my house." She took a long drink, the glass trembling in her hand. "I'm a fraud, Julian. I'm judging him for lying. But what am I doing? What are we doing?" Julian sat next to her. The distance between them on the sofa was less than 6 inches. The air in the room felt thin, charged with the static of everything they hadn't said for weeks. "We're surviving," Julian said. "We're trying to find a way out of the wreckage." "Are we?" Clara turned to him. The raw vulnerability in her face broke something inside him. Or are we just building a new wreck? She reached out, her hand gripping his wrist. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was desperate. Tell me to go home, Julian. Tell me to go back to Mark and accept the trip to Paris. Tell me to stop. Julian looked at her, mouth, then at her eyes. He saw the same loneliness that had been eating at him for years. He saw a woman who had been starving for being seen, truly seen, not just as a trophy or a habit, but as a person. I can't, he whispered. The words hung there, heavy and final. Clara moved first, or maybe he did. It didn't matter. The collision was inevitable. When he kissed her, it wasn't tentative. It wasn't the staged intimacy of the restaurant or the calculated photo in Montauk. It was a crash. It was a desperate, hungry attempt to silence the noise in their heads. He pulled her closer, his hands tangling in her damp hair. She made a sound against his mouth, half sob, half sigh, and clung to him as if the floor were falling away. There was no romance in it, not in the traditional sense. It was urgent and messy. It was the physical manifestation of grief. As they moved together in the shadows of the studio, shedding clothes and inhibitions, it felt less like making love and more like a mutual confession. They were seeking oblivion in each other's skin. Later, the silence returned, but it was different now. It was heavier. Clara sat up, pulling Julian's shirt around her shoulders. She stared out at the rain-streaked window. The skyline of Manhattan burned brightly across the water, indifferent to their moral collapse. We're just like them now, she said, her voice hollow. Julian lay back, staring at the exposed beams of the ceiling. He wanted to deny it. He wanted to say that their betrayal was justified, that it was a reaction, a balancing of scales. But the weight in his chest told him the truth. They had lost the high ground. They were no longer the righteous victims holding the evidence. They were accomplices. No, Julian said, reaching for her hand, interlacing their fingers. They did it because they were bored. We did it because we were broken. Does that make a difference? Clara asked, looking back at him. I don't know, Julian admitted. But I know I can't pretend anymore. Not with you, and not with her. He sat up, the reality of the coming days settling in. The Met Gala was in 3 days. When we walk into that gala, Julian said, his voice hardening, it won't be a game anymore. We aren't acting. This is real, and it's going to destroy everything. Clara tightened her grip on his hand. Good, she whispered, though she was trembling. Let it burn. The great hall of the Metropolitan Museum of Art was transformed into a cavern of gold light and white roses. It was the kind of event where the air conditioning was set to a precise temperature to preserve the makeup of socialites and the patience of billionaires. Julian stood near the Temple of Dendur, a glass of champagne untouched in his hand. He wore a tuxedo that fit like armor. Beside him, Clara stood in a gown of severe gunmetal silk. She looked regal, but her hand, hidden in the folds of her dress, was trembling. They're here, she whispered, her gaze fixed on the grand staircase. Elena and Mark descended separately, a calculated move to avoid suspicion, yet they gravitated toward the same orbit. Elena was radiant in crimson, playing the part of the beloved gallery director. Mark looked flushed, scanning the room with the frantic energy of a man who realized his wife wasn't answering his texts. When they spotted Julian and Clara standing together, the reaction was visceral. Elena's smile faltered, a glitch in the broadcast. Mark stopped dead, nearly causing a waiter to drop a tray of hors d'oeuvres. They approached. The convergence was inevitable, like a car crash occurring in slow motion. "Julian," Elena said, her voice pitched high, breathless. She reached for his arm, but he stepped back. Her hand grasped at empty air. "I've been texting you all day. And, Clara? What are you doing here?" "I invited her," Julian said. His voice was not loud, yet it cut through the ambient chatter of the gala like a scalpel. Mark stepped forward, his face darkening. "You invited my wife? I thought you said you were sick, Clara." "I recovered," Clara said, lifting her chin. Her eyes met Mark's, and for the first time she didn't look away. "Julian thought I might enjoy the art." "This is ridiculous," Elena hissed, her eyes darting around to see who was watching. "People are staring. Julian, stop this. We are going to sit at our table and you are going to explain why you're humiliating me." "I'm not humiliating you, Elena," Julian replied calmly. "I'm just matching your energy." He gestured to a quiet alcove near the Egyptian exhibit, away from the main thoroughfare of photographers. "Let's talk, unless you want to do this in front of the Vogue team." The four of them moved into the shadows of the sandstone walls. The silence here was ancient and heavy. "What is going on?" Mark demanded, turning on Clara. "You've been acting strange for weeks. The texts, the disappearing acts, the work trips. Are you sleeping with him?" He pointed a shaking finger at Julian. Elena gasped, playing the victim perfectly. "Julian, tell me it's not true. Tell me you haven't been—" Julian laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "It's fascinating," he said, looking at his wife. "You are so terrified that I've done to you what you've been doing to me." Elena froze. The color drained from her face, leaving the rouge standing out starkly against her pale skin. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The Carlisle," Clara said softly. "Room 412, Tuesdays and Thursdays. The client dinners. The trip to Art Basel that Mark didn't go to, but you did." Mark looked at Clara, then at Elena. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He didn't deny it. He just looked defeated. "You knew?" Mark whispered. "How long?" "Since the beginning," Julian lied. It felt powerful to claim ownership of the timeline. "We gave you a chance to stop. We gave you a chance to come clean. Instead, you bought flowers. You booked trips to Paris. You tried to bury your guilt under gifts." "We were lonely," Elena choked out, the tears finally real. "Julian, you were never there. You were always working, always in your head." "Mark." He listened. "And I suppose I didn't listen?" Clara asked, her voice cracking with suppressed rage. "I listened to every complaint, every insecurity, every ego trip for 10 years, Mark. I made myself small so you could feel big. And your solution was to find someone who didn't know you well enough to see the cracks." "It's over," Julian said. He felt a strange lightness, as if a fever had broken. "The marriage, the lies, all of it." Elena reached out again, desperate. "Julian, please, don't do this here. We can fix this. It was a mistake. It meant nothing." "That's the problem, Elena," Julian said, looking at her with a clarity that hurt more than anger. "It meant nothing to you, but it destroyed us. And now, I'm done being the architect of a house nobody lives in." He turned to Clara. "Are you ready?" Clara looked at Mark one last time. She took off her wedding ring, a simple gold band, and placed it on the pedestal of a statue of a faceless pharaoh. "I'm ready," she said. Julian offered his arm. Clara took it. They walked away, back toward the lights and the noise, leaving their spouses standing in the shadows of the tomb, surrounded by the wreckage of their own making. They didn't look back. But as they stepped out into the cool night air of Fifth Avenue, Julian realized that the hardest part wasn't leaving. It was figuring out who they were now that the war was over. The silence in the penthouse was different now. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of waiting for a key to turn in the lock. It was the echo of an empty room. Julian stood in the center of the living room. The Italian leather sofa was gone. The art was gone. The white oak floors were bare, save for a few scuff marks where the movers had dragged the remnants of his marriage out the door. The divorce had been swift, brutal, and expensive. Elena hadn't fought him. Once the facade cracked at the gala, her defiance had evaporated, replaced by a sullen resignation. She had moved to a sublet in Chelsea. Mark and Clara's separation was messier. Mark had oscillated between begging for forgiveness and threatening legal action, but the result was the same. The papers were signed. The power couples were dissolved. Julian picked up his keys. He didn't live here anymore. He had moved full-time into the studio in Dumbo, trading the pristine view of the Hudson for the gritty industrial skyline of Brooklyn. It was smaller, darker, and infinitely more honest. He hadn't seen Clara in 3 months. It was a decision they had made the night after the gala, sitting on a park bench near Central Park, as the adrenaline of their confrontation faded into exhaustion. "We can't just be together now," Clara had said, watching the sunrise over the trees. "If we do, we're just the aftermath. We're the rebound. I need to know who I am when I'm not Mark's wife and not your co-conspirator." "I know," Julian had replied, though the thought of letting her go terrified him more than the divorce. "We need to heal separately." So they drifted. No texts, no staged photos, no revenge dates, just silence. The months passed in a blur of work. Julian started designing again, not the cold, imposing towers he was famous for, but residential projects that prioritized light and warmth. He reconnected with old friends he had neglected during his marriage. He learned to cook for one without feeling pathetic. He learned to sleep in the middle of the bed. Autumn turned to winter, and winter thawed into a tentative spring. On a Tuesday in April, a year to the day since he had received that first LinkedIn message, Julian found himself walking through the West Village. He wasn't there by accident. He entered the small coffee shop on Perry Street. The bell above the door chimed, a cheerful, welcoming sound that replaced the memory of the notification that had shattered his life. She was sitting at a window table, reading a book. She wore a simple trench coat and a scarf, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked different. The sharpness was gone, replaced by a softness that came from peace. Julian stopped at the counter. His heart hammered against his ribs, a physical reminder that he was alive. Clara sensed him before she saw him. She looked up. For a moment, nobody moved. They were just two people across a room, stripped of their spouses, their secrets, and their schemes. There was no revenge left to take. There was only the truth. She smiled. It wasn't the tight, performative smile of the spotted pig. It was easy, real. "Hi," Julian said, reaching the table. "Hi," Clara replied, closing her book. "Seat taken?" I hope not, Julian said. He sat down. The sunlight filtered through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air between them. How are you? She asked. Rebuilding, Julian said. The foundation was rotten. I had to tear it all down. Me too, Clara nodded. I got tenure. I moved into a brownstone in Harlem. It has a garden. I'm terrible at gardening, but I'm learning. I'd like to see it, Julian said. The garden. Clara looked at him, her eyes searching his face, looking for the man who had plotted with her in the dark. She didn't find him. She found someone new. I'd like that, she said softly. The waitress came over, placing 2 cups of coffee on the table. It was a mundane moment. No cameras, no gossip, no high stakes, just coffee. Julian took a sip. He looked at Clara, really looked at her, and realized that the anger that had fueled him for so long was gone. The revenge date had been a weapon, yes. It had been a way to survive the humiliation. But it had led him here, to this quiet table, to this fresh start. He thought about the title of the chapter of his life that had just ended. He thought about the pain, the betrayal, and the chaos. And then he looked at the woman sitting across from him, the sun catching the gold in her eyes. You know, Julian said, a faint smile playing on his lips. Accepting that date. It was the best choice I ever made. Clara laughed, and the sound was the most beautiful thing he had heard in years. Me too, Julian, she said. Me too. They sat there for a long time, watching the city move outside the window, in no rush to go anywhere, finally content to just be.